Hey, welcome back to the Field and Faith podcast. I'm your host, Chris Barton, and as always, I'm here with
Luke D.
And we are going to dive into another controversial topic that has been developing more and more with young men, and we're going to dub this one Failure to Launch, a good old Matthew McConaughey reference, which, if you don't know the movie, is going to be talking about the idea of young men who are staying at home, aren't developing nearly as quickly as maybe past generations have, and we're just going to give our thoughts on this wonderful topic.
Yeah, I think it's a really important topic now, especially because, you look at statistics of things and young men and the way they're kind of growing into men and, like marriage rates are down. People aren't getting married till older. There's people not staying in their careers and jumping ship to a lot of different careers, and a lot of stuff is happening where I think it's because of stuff that's happened early on in our lives that have not set us up for success to become a man.
Well, I mean, being in education for as long as I have, I can clearly state where the education system is coming from. I mean, we're still running from the same education system that was in process from like Civil War era. Like, hey, here's your subjects. You're going to learn history. You're going to math. You're going to learn science. You're going to learn economics. And we've really gotten away from the electives that really used to drive, like home economics is no longer really taught in the high school realm any longer. You got your physical education, but there isn't those life skills. And we talked a little bit before we started recording, is just how much of our education system develops outside of the classroom through the people that we surround ourselves with, our fathers, our mothers, and what they instill in us and how they educate us on like how to handle our financials, how to do all this stuff. And most of the time, what we're starting to see is parents' lack of forced education in these areas. And kids are just coming out of high school, going into college, and coming back home within a year because they don't know how to wash their clothes. They don't know how to be prepared for their life. And this is just for males and females. And, it's kind of a tricky situation that we're getting with the new generation.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, if you look at like the homeschoolers, for instance, there's tons of people that are kind of switching over to this homeschool route instead of traditional school. And I see it for a lot of reasons, right? We have a lot of friends that are teachers and everybody's upset about the school system and teachers and all that kind of stuff. It's like, we're not mad at the teachers and what they're teaching. It's the curriculum and what the educational system as a whole is teaching, right? It's because why do we need to learn chemistry? How is chemistry or algebra going to help us later on in life? Like, we're not teaching our kids how to financially be responsible. We're not teaching them how to live in a home setting, how to make food for themselves, how to interact with another partner, or, like how to interact with kids and people around you. We're not teaching these things. We're teaching them like, this is what a cell is. Yeah, that might be important if you become a doctor, right? Like, we need to have more specific training on how to live life. And I think that's why the homeschool system is doing really well now, is because we need to learn these things and we're not teaching these things.
Yeah, and I mean, I am in the education, and I don't think I fault anyone who goes into it who is like a chemistry teacher or science teacher, or for me, history and social studies. Like, I see there's total value in it, but I agree in the sense of we've taken these complex situations, biology, chemistry, and we basically said that everyone needs to learn these things, but we haven't taken the very simple things like how to budget a checkbook, how to save money, how to set a budget, how to live according to a budget. And we haven't done these like projects with these kids because they all assume that they're going to go to college and they're going to walk out of there because they've done their schooling, and they assume that their grades are going to equate to success in the future. But I've never had, well, I have, but very rarely do I ever have to write down what my GPA was that I got when I graduated college or high school or whatever the case may be, because that doesn't indicate any amount of success. It's like, how much grit, how much work can you actually get done? And while you have a college degree, that may show like, oh, you can work through tough situations, you can continue on in this process, but there's so much that goes into it that young people are failing at, because I think personally is parents have done a lot of the work for them. Like, we want our kids to have the least stressful life possible. And because we've taken away those responsibilities, like, hey, how to wash your own clothes, how to get a job while you're in high school, like how to manage your time, we've taken that away from them, and we've really pushed on them academic success. But that academic success doesn't always equate to exactly what you said, life success.
Well, too, when we look at like education and everything that it is, you can't honestly tell me as a 16-year-old, what you're going to want to do as a 30-year-old, right? And I think we're seeing a lot of kids going to college for a certain, minor or what they're trying to be, and then they end up dropping out of that later because they weren't ready for that position, or they weren't fully understanding of what they were going to be doing in this. You know what I mean? And it's because we're not setting them up. We're trying to teach them skills and understandings of like, what does a 16-year-old want to do? They want to get in a car. They want to drive. They're trying to start to the process of figuring out who they are. And we're trying to shove down all this educational stuff that's really not important for them in their time and in their moment. And we need to be teaching them, hey, this is how you do your laundry. This is how you can cook for yourself. That's something that we do in our home. Like, Hunter's 8 years old. That kid can make his own lunch. He can make his own breakfast because we had to show him these things early on, because he always asked us, hey, will you make me breakfast? Yeah, I can make you breakfast, but can you make yourself breakfast? These are the things that we have to teach our kids in order to have them grow. One of the crazy sayings that I love is, if you want to spoil your grandchildren, you have to raise your kids. But if you spoil your kids, you're going to end up raising your grandchildren. And it's so true, because we all want to do this, right? We all had a hard time growing up, and we don't want our kids to go through the same things that we went through. But let's be real. We overspoil them. We do too much for them because we are loving them, because we don't want them to struggle like we did. But in the end, they end up struggling because we overdid it.
I think it's that cocoon model that we all had to learn in life science, right? The butterfly has to come out. Now, if you cut the butterfly out of the cocoon, what happens to the butterfly? Do you remember that?
I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure it dies.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. The butterfly dies. You have to let it struggle through the cocoon. It has to have like the strength to like break out of that hard exterior shell. And, I think the protection model, we're seeing very quickly how it hasn't worked for us. And we've allowed so much to like facilitate. Now, I kind of always joking around like the video games and stuff like that, but there's now a whole wide world of career of people making living off of playing video games, because that has become so popular. There's an entire world of people who are making living off of this. And so what we used to criticize in the past has become like a financial means for a lot of people. But for a lot of people, they are consumers. And I think that is something that really needs to be on the forefront with adults, with young people, is teaching them how to be producers rather than consumers, where a consumer can tell you all the different labels of every single thing in their life. But all that they're doing is consuming the media. They're not looking to make anything. Like, oh, I love fashion, but they're not making anything with fashion. Or their passion has to coincide with something that they can tangibly do so that they love their job. Because I think too many young people, like, the reason why they don't want to step out is because they want to do something they love. And I think as adults, we realize sometimes you just need to make a paycheck. You don't need to love your job. You just need something to get by, because sometimes what you love is a passion project like this.
Yeah, I think one of the great sayings that I love from Kurt Warner is, you got to do what you got to do until you can do what you want to do.
Ooh, Kurt Warner. I like that, man.
Yeah, dude. And it's so true, because it's, like, I don't know how many jobs I've been in where I've just had to grind it out just to get by until I could do something I want to do, and going back to the consumer aspect, like, we live in a consumer driven society, like, right? Like, look at the church. And this is like something that drives me insane with churches as a whole. You go to church, you listen to the pastor speak, you go through your week, you do it again every Sunday. And how many of those people are actually reading their Bibles, or actually going back and looking? Yeah, they might look back at their notes that they wrote down, or the notes they were given by the pastors. Like, dude, we just want to consume. We don't actually want to learn ourselves. We don't want to go out and do the work and put in the time to actually understand. Like, man, I was the same way too, like reading a Bible. Like, I was like, I don't need to read a Bible. I can go and I can do praise and worship, and I can get all the feelies, and I can listen to a really good sermon and be really happy, and then I go through my week and I wonder why, wow, this is not working out. This sucks. I need to go back to church on Sunday again and do it again, right? It's because I wasn't doing the work. I wasn't putting in the effort and trying. The second that I started putting in the effort, I understood and I could walk through it.
Yeah, I mean, exactly what you're saying right there. The Bible story that comes to my mind is like harvesters. Like there's a lot of people in the field, but there's not enough harvesters. And there's not enough people who are exactly doing the work that is required to really go into this. Like I started a new job here not too long ago working at an all-boys Jewish school. And I'll tell you what, those boys know their scriptures. Like I've been looking at their books and they've been teaching me what they have to do for their Torah studies. And it is so much more intense. They're in class from 7:30 in the morning till about 1 o'clock, learning and memorizing prayers, arguing over text, learning like what we would call like a commentary. They've got commentaries on their commentaries that have more commentaries. And they're doing small passages or verses and really dissecting it so that they can understand God's word. Whereas we might have an argument and say, oh, we don't need to have this argument any longer because this is what it means, because I listen to so-and-so as a preacher and that's all that I need. Whereas there's a lot of interpretation. And one thing that I truly believe is this is the living word of God. I mean, the more I've read and engaged with scripture, the more the Holy Spirit has been able to educate me on different seasons of life. What that word meant to me when I was 20 years old means a completely different thing to me now that I'm reading that same scriptures and verses as a 37-year-old man. And the discipline of engaging with something that is difficult, which is understanding God's word and application and how to best facilitate that and being a disciple of Jesus, moving towards those things really get us in a positive mindset of accomplishment. But it's those difficulties along the way that if we're not having those, if we're not facing challenges, we're not gaining the confidence that is needed, especially with these young people, because I would say fear of failure is what is just gripping this young generation.
Yeah, it's true, man. It's, even with myself, like I'm afraid to fail, but at the same time, I will not allow myself to fail, like to a fault. Like I will always make sure we have enough money because I will go out and work obnoxiously amount of hours just to make sure that we have enough. I will not do anything unless I know I will succeed at it. You know what I mean? And it's because it was instilled in me early on of like, you want something, you have to go out and earn it. Like I remember I wanted a pair of Jordans, and it was these Jordans that came out like, I think 2003, 2002, they came on that metal suitcase. Everybody wanted them. It was like the first pair of shoes to come out. They were over $200 and it was a big deal. And of course my mom wasn't going to buy them for me because I'm going to grow out of them in 6 months anyways. So I went out for an entire summer mowing lawns to make money to be able to buy these dang shoes. Granted, it was not a gas-powered lawnmower because we didn't have a lot of money, so it was the old-school push guy, and the more you push, the faster they cut. So I went out for an entire summer and cut grass to get these dang shoes, man. And I got these shoes, and they were the wrong size, and they didn't fit, and I couldn't return them because everything was out of stock. But there's a piece of that that's important, right? Because I went out and I earned it, and I remembered that moment, and I still remember that moment that the second that you earn something for yourself, there's so much gratification and thankfulness that comes through that if you go out and put in the work, right? Like God's going to do his piece. He set me up to have all those opportunities to be able to mow those lawns and get the money that I needed so that I could succeed in this moment. And I succeeded. Granted, it failed to some aspect because I got the wrong size and whatever it may be, but you have to get out and you have to try in order to succeed. And the more you try, the more you build up your confidence, the more you build up your resilience, the more you understand what it takes to have these accomplishments.
Yeah. And the only argument that I would say with this is I don't personally believe hard work equates to success. I think either there has to be kind of a combination of different things, because hard work, people can grind and grind and grind, and some of the hardest workers are individuals that are making minimum wage. I mean, there are individuals in our lives that, are janitors and cleaners, and they work crazy amounts of hours. They're hardworking people, but they're barely scraping by. They're barely doing enough. So I think the combination has to be is you have to develop in somebody the skills of hard work, like the persistence, the grit of hard work, and couple that with skills and education. And there is no excuse any longer for it. And so I've always said you have to replace education over entertainment. You have to prioritize your education and the things that you want to do with your life and your skills over your entertainment so that you can become successful.
Yeah, well, it's hard work from the grand scheme of things of, are you going to put in the time to educate yourself and focus on what you need to in order to actually put it? Yeah, it's all hard work at the end of the day. And I think even now, like myself, I'm trying to figure out a daily schedule for myself, something I've never done. I hardly look at a schedule. I remember everything. Sometimes I write stuff down, but like, dude, to put in the effort to try to do a daily schedule of I'm going to wake up at this time, from this hour to this hour, I'm going to do this stuff.
All right, so I'm going to interject. I'm just going to stop you right there. And all of those things work out perfectly. But what are the things that you've done that have actually made you successful? Because it wasn't just you. We've talked in previous episodes, if you haven't listened, about education, and you don't have a college degree. So what was it that you had to learn and do, and what skills did you have to develop on top of your work ethic that made you successful?
I think one of the things that I've done well is I've always had a job. I think since I was the age of 15, I got my first job, and I've always just worked and worked and worked. But one of the things that people always will notice about me is my eyes are always going all over the place, is because I'm always paying attention and like trying to watch what's happening to understand how people interact and what people do. So, one of the things that I've done is watch other people to see how they are being successful or not being successful in an act or an activity or whatever it may be. So I've tried to pay attention to that a lot. At the same time of doing something wrong, right? Doing something the wrong way and getting really annoyed at it and then having to go backwards is a really great learning opportunity. That's why I always tell people all the time, if you want to learn something, get your hands dirty. You have to get in there. You have to see how it works. You have to feel how it works. You have to fail in order to know where you can move forward with it. And that's really the only way you can be successful, is really to get your hands dirty and get in on the action and just move forward with it. Yeah, it's going to be scary. Yeah, it's going to be tough. You might not know what you're doing, but you're going to learn one way or another through it.
One thing that I did with my young kids is we would read this book called The Giving Tree. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Vaguely, yeah.
Vaguely. But it was like at the end of the book, the seniors would all do something that they would pass on to the freshmen, sophomores, and juniors at the end of the year for student council. And it was like the gift, like what gift would you give somebody else? I wish you could have somebody else. And every single year I've always said I'd always give the kids the gift of failure. I think failure is the greatest teacher that you can possibly have, because I'll promise you this, whether you look at your own education and your own life, you're going to remember your failures way more than you're going to remember your successes. Any bad trip you've ever been on, you remember the bad trip way more than you remember the really good trip. You remember the things that you got wrong on tests rather than the things that you got right. Like I still will mentally be like, oh, this is what I did wrong in college because I got a bad grade and I had to work harder towards that. It's the failures that end up teaching us, but I think it's a very important thing on how do we respond to failure. And for young people, this is a lesson that needs to be taught, is how do we respond? When someone doesn't win a game and they get a participation trophy, which we should probably do an entire episode on participation trophies. But if you're not ever achieving towards something, you lost. So now it means going back to the game plan and seeing, how do we make improvements? What do we need to change? And how can we make things better? Because when we adapt and change, I think that is like the evolution of a man from going from a boy to a man, is how many times have they failed and what have they gone through? And I would say for a lot of people in my life, the people who have been the most successful, you ask them about their early on life and they had a lot of failure to learn from.
Yeah, it's tough situations that make you stronger for who you are, and it's one of those things that I see with my own kids of like, I want them to fail early on to understand, and I don't want to hold their hands through a lot of things. And, I might be doing it to a fault, but it's like, I want them to understand of how to be successful and how to fail at stuff, right? And I think the biggest thing when you fail at something, it's okay to have the emotions of I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm frustrated. But I think the biggest part outside of that is, okay, I made a mistake, right? Because I think that's one thing that we don't do as a society or men is we don't own up to our own mistakes. And I think that's so important to understand that you made a mistake, but it's okay that you made a mistake. And then on top of that is, okay, how did I make a mistake? Where did I make a mistake? Is it because I went too fast? Is it because I was paying attention? Is it because I didn't follow these instructions? I think it's one of those things of just like, you have to own up to it. You have to go back and understand, like, where did I make the mistake so you don't do it again? And it's really part of the learning curve of like, you have to understand why you made the mistake and you have to own up to it.
So then I'm gonna pivot here, because let's get into the practical. Looking at your own life, I'm kind of examining mine and all the things that I failure to launch on. What are some practical things that you think you should be doing with your kids to prepare them to launch their own life and to be successful as?
I try to model it the best that I can. And I think that's probably the single most important, lead by example, right? We're supposed to be disciples. And I think we look at the idea of being a disciple as we're supposed to go out into the world and do it to other people, but it's like you have to disciple your own family first. I think leading by example is probably the first and foremost thing. But then two, right, is how do we interact with people is really important in my house. Of how do we interact as a family that are all together a lot of the time, and the frustrations will arise. And it's going to be the same thing when they move out on their own and they start their own families, or they're in a workplace and having to deal with people that are different from them, but they have to be with, right? Because that's the end of the day. We have to be with people whether we want to or not. So how do you interact with them? Yeah, things are going to arise and things are going to get frustrated. And sometimes you have to force yourself or force them to be in those situations to fail and understand and get upset and allow these things to happen. And then to show them the consequences too is really important, right? When you do these things, every response has a reaction to it. So the way you choose to interact with these people is going to change things, right? If you choose to yell at that person, yeah, it might be your brother, it might be your sister, but there's a reaction that's going to come along with it. That person's going to be hurt. You're now going to get in trouble for it. It's the same thing in the workplace, right? You yell at a coworker, you're going to get written up for it. Your coworker is going to look at you different. Now they might sabotage you. They might do whatever. You might get fired, right? There's things that they need to understand of like cause and reaction. And that's something that we try to teach in our home of like, hey, there's punishments for a reason. It's because that's how it is in the real world. There's a punishment when you do something.
Yeah. And I think it goes really well with like in faith too, right? Like Jesus is faithful and just to forgive, but it doesn't mean there's a whole slew of consequences that come along with our sin that we are fully engaged with because of the choices and the interactions that we end up making. And, I think the faith life is a good parallel for this because, I know a lot of people like, oh, I won't even like engage with anything like this because I'm fully aware of the consequences. But statistically, young people aren't doing the things that we used to mess around with and get in trouble with. Like they're so afraid of getting in trouble because now there's a social media world that will point out and cancel and do things. And so the fear of failure has a lot more consequences, I think. And I think, I don't know, are you seeing that at all with your daughter and, now that she's entered into middle school?
Yeah, I think, there's definitely a fear because she's afraid to fail. I think she has like a natural fear of that, which is really good. But, I see especially with like her friends of like the consequences aren't as much because there's an out for everything, right? There's a hack for everything to get out of everything. And that's what we've created in this world is like, there's a way out of everything, you know what I mean? In culture, like, yeah, social media, you can't get away from that. But yeah, you go out and have sex and you get knocked up. Well, there's a way out of that if you want to get out of that, right? If you go to jail, there's a way out of that. You could pay money. You can go to your parents and ask for their help or go to a judge. There's so many ways out of everything and we don't teach kids how to walk through it.
All right. So you said something really interesting there, that walk through. I always think, what about a safety net? Like, I think what my parents did was a good walkthrough for life. before like the full safety net was removed. Like they bought a second property when I was 21 years old, which is the current property that we're in right now recording this podcast. And they had purchased it as a financial investment, but they had me live in it. This was the first time I had moved out of my parents' place because I was 21 when I moved out, 2021 when I'd moved out. And they made me obviously pay rent, get roommates, but I was in full charge of who lived with me, the rent, collecting it. So it's $2,000 rent. Now, this was back in the day, $2,000 rent. Trying to get somebody who is a college-age individual to afford $1,000 a month was extremely difficult. And then the room that we're in right now, we turned into a bedroom. And I had multiple people living out of this one, and they were like struggling to pay $300-$400 a month. How are we expecting our kids to like launch in a society or a culture where average rent and home prices have completely skyrocketed? How can parents facilitate a launch for them to like go out and be successful when $500,000 is the median home price now in Phoenix, or rent is $2,500? Like, I want kids to go out and feel successful, but in order to do that, car payments, all these things come in. Has the world just gotten so bogged down that men and women who are young are not going to feel that instant gratification of success anymore, because the world is just going to completely like shut them down? Because the reason why we're seeing all this failure launch is, the biggest argument, of course, is financial reasons. Most of the young people that I've talked to that are former students of mine are still saying, I'm living at home because of financial reasons. And I totally get that. But there's other categories of life that can still be developed, that need to be developed in young people. But what does that look like with like a little bit of a safety net? And when do you take away the net?
I'll be honest, man. I don't know what a safety net really truly could be. I'll be honest with you. I mean, I think all we can do is teach our kids the way they're supposed to go, right? Like Proverbs, like we have to teach them the way they'll go so they'll stick with it. And I think that's really all we can do as parents, right? We have to teach them the basic necessities of life, right? Your spiritual health is super important. Your mind is super important. Your body is super important. These are the things that these three things coincide constantly with each other, right? If one is out of balance, they're all out of balance, right? And that could go back to your religion and how you read the Bible and how you study scripture, to what are you allowing your mind to feed into, right? Of social media and TV, and like, what are you allowing to do that in your body? Like, how are you taking care of yourself? Are you having clean clothes? Are you working too much? Are you drinking too many energy drinks? Like, are you doing all these things, right? If you have all these things, you have to teach these and lead kids through these elements. And I think too, we just have to teach our kids that what success is, right? Because I think that's another piece of this is the world has a standard of what success is. And it's no longer about what you earn, right? I think success is, I have this many views on social media. I have this many likes. And there's no earning anything anymore, right? If you want something now, you can go open a credit card, no matter who you are, how terrible your finances are, what place you're in, and you can go buy whatever you want, realistically. So like instant gratification and having self-gratification is what the world believes in and reacts to. And that's what they say success is nowadays, of go and get whatever you want because you deserve it. No, you don't deserve it because you haven't earned it and you haven't worked hard enough through it and you haven't ran through the fire yet. That's not success. And we have to stop teaching that. Like, success is going out, putting in the work, whatever that work looks like to you, and feeling proud of yourself.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And realizing like the things that people aren't putting out on there on social media is all the hard work and like the sacrifices that go into, one day having something. I remember when I was younger, living in here, paying $1,000 a month rent when I was student teaching, and I didn't want to work. So I saved up $15,000 while I was in college, which meant for almost a year and a half, I think every day for lunch, I had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Like, all I had in my desk when I was student teaching was a loaf of bread, peanut butter, and jelly. And the kids would all ask, like, what are you eating for lunch today? I'm like, peanut butter and jelly. What are you eating for lunch tomorrow? Peanut butter and jelly. They're like, that's all you eat. I go, Yeah, it's a good hearty meal every single day. And I mastered the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I became efficient at making something very cheap every single day that I knew was going to, one, give me enough energy, but I wasn't going out to lunch every single day. I wasn't buying Starbucks every single day. And I think for a lot of people, the idea of success looks like you're successful, but very much so, success looks like failure. Because someone who isn't drinking Starbucks every single day is probably saving a lot more money. We're preparing for something. Someone who doesn't have the fanciest, nicest looking clothing is probably just going out and buying secondhand thrift store stuff, which is saving them money. But it's building towards something that is going to provide success down the road. And I think a redefine of that can be extremely helpful, because it's hard to say to your friends, like, no, I can't go out to the bars on a Saturday night when you're 21, 22 years old, because that is like the world's most waste of money I could possibly think of, is how much money have I spent? But if you remember when we were younger, I was always the designated driver. And it wasn't because I didn't want to drink. It was because I didn't want to spend money.
Yeah, it's funny, man, right? And we have a saying here in Scottsdale too, of like going back to of looking successful, you know, the $30,000 millionaires.
Yeah.
Because the perception is reality in everybody's life, right? And if you look at like society as a whole, we look at, hey, YOLO, man, you only live once, live for today, don't worry about tomorrow. But then like the Bible is, don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to worry about itself because God's going to take care of you. And that's kind of the difference of like, hey, you have right now, you got to live it up the best you can. And God's like, no. Hey, don't worry about tomorrow because I got you. And I think that's kind of the difference. You know, one of the analogies that I love of like the true aspects of life that's popped in my head of like, remember playing freshman football? I don't know if you played freshman football, but
Never played football.
But you'd have to do running drills and you'd have a line of dudes that you had to run through and they were all hitting you with mats, like as you're running through, and you have to stay on your feet. Man, that is life. Like, you are not exempt from the troubles of this life. It doesn't matter how good of a Christian you are. It doesn't matter how much money you have. This life is going to knock you on your butt a few times. But you have to keep going. And that's just how it's going to be, man. You have to keep going. You have to keep running this race. You're going to be successful. Follow your guides. Follow your disciplines. Remember what you were taught. Read your Bible. Read your Bible.
And read books.
Yeah, I read a lot of books now, which I never read books until I became an adult, which was like 30, right? I think becoming an adult was 30 for me. So
yeah, and I would say like there's aspects of my life that I would say I failure to launch on, which was like that education component. Like, I never read. I struggled reading all throughout my childhood, and so for me, reading is an audiobook. But I try and listen to an audiobook like every other week now, because I see the value of it. And you know, if you're young and you're listening to this, or if you're a father and you've got a young kid, exemplify in your own life for them what it means to be an educated individual. Like, choose education over entertainment. Put on an audiobook in front of your kids, like what you're listening to. Talk to your kids about what you are learning, because they need to see like learning just doesn't mean what they're doing in a classroom. Some of the most successful things are what you can learn from books and other people's life stories, because they're giving their best advice in 150 pages. And that can be something that can immediately transform somebody else's life, a spiritual walk, business. And so there's a lot of ways to kind of cultivate a way to safely launch these kids that is also going to give them the tools, the necessity, the skills, the education that they're going to need in this modern world that the school system, like we talked about in the beginning, is just not going to provide. So, Luke, I'm going to have you close us off today. What is a story?
I'm actually going to double down on what you just said too, because I think, right, and then too, as a parent specifically, like walk your kids on how to fail. Like, if you fail in something because they're watching you, right, are you going to teach them and educate them on how to walk through failure, or are you going to let them look on TikTok at that YouTube star of how that kid's failing, because that kid's not failing? He hit a niche and he's making a ton of money, and now your child believes that they can be that YouTube star, when reality is it's probably not going to happen, and you're going to fail at this, and it's okay. But how are you going to fail in this, and how are you going to walk it out, and how are you going to do these things? And how are you going to accept that failure and move on to the next?
I still want you to tell a story because I have nothing.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a good story to tell. Maybe this last javelina hunt, that was a failure for me. But it was actually not a failure because there was some good in it. So we went on a rifle javelina hunt this last February, and I decided to take my son, who is 8 years old, because I really would like him to get into hunting, and he's kind of been iffy about it. So we went out, we were meeting some buddies there, and they were running super late. So I decided, hey, let's just go out and see what happens. We're not going to set up camp. Let's just go do a little scouting ahead of time, and we'll see what happens. So we're driving down the road, and sure enough, there's a herd of javelina running alongside my truck about 40 yards out. And I'm like, all right, buddy, it's go time. We're on this rifle hunt. I decided to bring my bow because I really wanted to get the archery kill in. Pulled over, get my bow out, and I'm trying to coach him through the scenario. All right, you're going to stay 10 yards behind me at all times. These things can be aggressive, but don't be afraid because I'm going to protect you. I have my bow. I have a gun too if we need it. But like, stay behind me. I want you to experience this. I want you to see this. Be quiet, right? Trying to coach them through all these things in a very short amount of time. So we're tracking these javelina. They're wandering alongside the road still about 40, 50 yards away. And I get to a spot and they all stop because they finally notice we're there. I look back to check to see if he's still behind me. Sure enough, he's right behind me off to the right so he can see everything that's happening. Pull back. I got a beautiful 30, I think it was like a 34-yard shot on this big chunky javelina, man. I held it for a minute trying to make sure it was still going to be a good shot, and I let it rip. Hit that thing right in the vitals. I see about 6 inches of my arrow sticking out, and I see that javelina take off running, and I turn back and look at my son, and he got to see the whole thing, which was such a cool moment because, right, he wasn't scared. He was actually paying attention, and he thought it was really cool himself. He had a smile on his face. I was like, all right, dude, the job is done. We just had a lot of fun. Now we got to go get that javelina and break it down. So we walk back to the truck, get my pack, get my knives, get all my stuff, start tracking this thing. There's not a drop of blood anywhere. So now I'm starting to get a little nervous because earlier in the year I had shot a deer and it didn't have much blood either. So we're tracking this thing, and I'm just doing the circle method where we know where it went in the rough area, and we're just walking circles and getting bigger circles and bigger circles and bigger circles and not seeing a drop of blood. We see tracks everywhere, but no blood, and I know I hit this guy on the right spot. We ended up finding some deer sheds, which was really cool. We found a matching set. But we literally walked around in that area for 3 days looking for this javelina that I hit in the vitals. Perfect shot. Didn't find my arrow. Didn't find the javelina. He wasn't disappointed. He had so much fun, which made the failure of me not finding this dang animal all worthwhile because now every year on his birthday, we are going camping and doing some sort of hunting trip. So it was a failure, but turned it into a success.
Yep. And by the time you listen to this episode, we will have gone on Hunter's birthday trip.
For a turkey hunt.
So you, me, Hunter, and is Patrick going to be coming?
Patrick's not coming, but our friend Mike's coming.
Yeah. Very cool. So very excited about that. And yeah, so guys, if there's any more comments or anything like that, please give us a 5-star rating. It is one thing that I'm learning very quickly, that ratings are everything when it comes to these things. So take the time, just go click 5-star rating. Even if you don't like us, it'll just help boost things a little bit more. Comment on it, and then we can get back to you guys as well. Instagram is where we're probably going to get the most chatter. But
yeah, follow us on social media, fieldfaith.org. Go to our website, fieldfaith.org, if you want to donate, sponsor a kid in our program.
Get some merch.
We got merch launching here very, very soon. So yeah, check it out.